In this shadowy world of international drug trafficking, appearances can be meticulously crafted deceptions. At a luxurious compound nestled in the remote Sierra Madre Mountains, the notorious Águila Negra cartel was about to discover that the most dangerous operatives are often those hiding in plain sight. When its ruthless leader decided to humiliate a seemingly broken-down cartel veteran with his unremarkable civilian habits, he couldn't have known he was provoking the very man who had dismantled drug syndicates across 3 continents and whose intelligence network had brought down criminal empires that entire military operations couldn't breach. Before we delve deeper into this riveting account, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extraordinary that will leave you speechless. The evening heat clung to the valley surrounding Villa Oscura as Miguel Reyes navigated his dusty Dodge Ram through the winding mountain roads. The fading sunlight filtered through ancient oak trees, casting elongated shadows across the cracked asphalt that stretched through this forgotten corner of Sinaloa. The truck's modified undercarriage concealed a sophisticated communication system, while its weathered exterior projected the perfect image of a mid-level cartel soldier who had seen better days. 20 years of dedicated service to his country had taught Miguel to appreciate the value of unremarkable appearances. His journey from Marine Force Recon to the Special Activities Division of the CIA had been marked by an extraordinary ability to blend into the most dangerous environments on Earth. Now, after 3 years of deep cover infiltration, he was closer than any American operative had ever come to the inner circle of Alejandro El Cuervo Dominguez, the criminal mastermind who had transformed the Águila Negra from regional smugglers into a transnational criminal organization with tentacles reaching into 47 countries. Miguel's hand instinctively touched the jagged scar that ran along his jawline, a battlefield souvenir from Afghanistan that now served as the perfect backstory for his undercover identity as a former Mexican Special Forces operator who had fallen from grace and found his way into cartel service. The DEA, FBI, and Mexican authorities had all failed to penetrate Dominguez's inner circle. The cartel leader's legendary paranoia and sophisticated counterintelligence measures had frustrated law enforcement for nearly a decade. But Miguel possessed advantages that conventional law enforcement could never match. The agency's most advanced deep cover protocols, a meticulously crafted false identity that had been layered into official records over 7 years, and specialized training in psychological infiltration techniques that allowed him to project precisely the right balance of competence and submission required to survive in the cartel's brutal hierarchy. Isabella Cortez wiped the condensation from her glasses as she stood behind the bar of La Cantina Escondida, watching through the grimy windows as Miguel's truck pulled into the gravel parking area. The 68-year-old proprietor had owned this remote establishment for over 3 decades, providing her with the perfect vantage point to observe the region's shifting criminal dynamics. Something about the precision of Miguel's movements and the alertness in his seemingly tired eyes caught her attention. How he appeared perfectly relaxed while his gaze methodically catalogued every vehicle, patron, and potential exit with unnatural awareness. "Evening, Doña Isabella," Miguel called as he entered the dimly lit cantina, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who had learned to navigate dangerous spaces through careful word selection. His deliberately casual stride concealed A lifetime of tactical movement training, each step placing him in optimal position relative to entrances, exits, and potential threats. "Just passing through," Miguel remarked with a respectful nod. Meeting with El Cuervo's lieutenants at the Hacienda tomorrow. Isabella studied his movements with the discerning eye of someone who had watched countless men posture and pretend throughout decades in cartel territory. Unlike the typical sicarios who frequented her establishment, Miguel carried himself with a contained precision that spoke of professional training far beyond the cartel's brutal but undisciplined methods. Inside the cantina, the ancient ceiling fan struggled against the evening heat as Miguel selected a corner table that offered clear sightlines to all entrances. Isabella brought over a bottle of tequila without being asked, studying his face as she placed it before him. "Military?" she asked quietly. Though her tone suggested she already knew the answer, Miguel nodded almost imperceptibly, maintaining his cover story. "Mexican Marines, once upon a time. Special Forces," she continued, her eyes noting the way he controlled his breathing and the methodical manner in which he positioned himself at the table, the unconscious habits of someone trained to maintain situational awareness in hostile territory. "Something like that," Miguel replied with the ghost of a smile, neither confirming nor denying. "Those aren't the hands of an ordinary sicario," Isabella said softly, nodding toward Miguel's scarred knuckles, the distinctive calluses that came from thousands of hours of weapons training. "Not the usual cartel trajectory." Before Miguel could respond, the rumble of luxury SUVs grew louder, the sound reverberating against the cantina's wooden walls. Through the windows, they watched as 3 black Escalades with tinted windows pulled into the parking area, their chrome cartel emblems catching the last light of day. The vehicles moved with practiced precision, forming a protective perimeter that spoke of professional security protocols. "Passive observation protocol," Miguel whispered into the seemingly ordinary silver watch on his wrist, a command that activated the surveillance systems concealed within his truck, capturing facial recognition data, vehicle information, and electronic communications from the new arrivals. To anyone watching, he appeared to be merely checking the time. But the agency's technical division had embedded cutting-edge intelligence-gathering capabilities into every ordinary-looking item he carried. Isabella's expression hardened as she moved back toward the bar. "Might want to finish your drink quickly. That's Victor Salgado's personal security detail. El Cuervo's head of enforcement doesn't usually visit establishments this far from his territory." Miguel continued sipping his tequila, his expression unchanged, but his mind racing through potential scenarios. Victor El Verdugo Salgado was Dominguez's most brutal lieutenant, responsible for the cartel's expansion into Jalisco territory and the spectacularly violent message killings that had terrorized the region. His unexpected appearance in this remote location couldn't be coincidence. The lead figure emerged first, a muscular man in his 40s wearing an impeccably tailored suit despite the heat, with distinctive tattoos visible at his collar and wrists. Victor Salgado moved with the confident swagger of someone accustomed to being feared, his eyes cold and calculating beneath a veneer of charm. His gaze narrowed when he spotted Miguel through the window, a predatory smile spreading across his face. "Well, what do we have here?" he announced to his entourage as they entered the cantina. Miguel Reyes himself, drinking alone in this shithole. Didn't expect to find El Cuervo's newest favorite so far from the compound. Miguel's hand remained steady on his glass, his expression neutral, but his mind already calculating angles, distances, and potential scenarios. His CIA training had included extensive psychological profiling of the cartel's leadership structure, allowing him to recognize the jealousy and suspicion lurking beneath Salgado's theatrical greeting. Special assignment. Miguel responded with deliberate ambiguity, respectful but not subservient. The careful balance was critical. Too much deference would suggest weakness, while any challenge to Salgado's authority could prove fatal to both his cover and his life. The cantina's atmosphere transformed instantly as the other patrons recognized the potential for violence. Local farmers and laborers quietly settled their tabs and disappeared into the night, leaving only Isabella, Miguel, and Salgado's crew in the suddenly silent establishment. Those are interesting arrangements you made last month with the Sonora. Distribution routes, Salgado commented, his men spreading out in a practiced formation around the cantina. Very efficient, very innovative, almost like something designed by someone with specialized training. The tension in the air thickened as Salgado's men positioned themselves strategically throughout the cantina. Their movements revealed their backgrounds. To Miguel's trained eye, not just ordinary sicarios, but former military and police, many likely corrupted through plata o plomo, the cartel's silver or lead approach to recruitment. Just applying common sense, Miguel replied with calculated modesty. The mountain routes were too exposed to federal surveillance. Salgado's smile never reached his eyes as he pulled out a chair opposite Miguel, positioning himself deliberately in what interrogation specialists recognize as a dominant posture. El Cuervo has developed quite an appreciation for your insights, unusual for someone who only joined our organization 3 years ago. Through his specialized training, Miguel recognized the dangerous undercurrents. Salgado wasn't simply intimidating a perceived rival. He was conducting a counterintelligence assessment. The cartel's internal security protocols had identified something about Miguel's cover that raised questions, not enough to trigger immediate action, but sufficient to warrant this unexpected confrontation. I'm grateful for Don Alejandro's recognition, Miguel responded, using the respectful form of address for the cartel leader. But I know my place in the organization. Do you? Salgado leaned forward, invading Miguel's personal space in a calculated intimidation technique. Because your place seems to be rising rather quickly, from border runner to strategic advisor, in just 36 months. That's the kind of trajectory that makes some people curious. Miguel maintained his calm facade while his mind processed the implications with cold precision. His cover identity had been meticulously crafted by the CIA's best strategists, with false records planted in military databases, criminal histories established across multiple jurisdictions, and even manufactured prison records that would withstand most background investigations. But Salgado's presence here suggested the cartel's counterintelligence was becoming increasingly sophisticated. I've always been a quick study, Miguel offered with just the right hint of carefully controlled pride. The perfect psychological balance for a former military man who had found unexpected success in criminal enterprise while knowing enough to remain appropriately deferential to leadership. Isabella moved carefully behind the bar, her hand drifting below the counter where Miguel had previously noted the outline of what was almost certainly a shotgun. The elderly woman had survived decades in cartel territory by understanding when violence was imminent. "Your military record is interesting reading," Salgado continued, signaling to one of his men, who placed a thick file folder on the table between them. "Special Forces Grupo Aeromóvil de Fuerzas Especiales, distinguished service, then a dishonorable discharge following an operation in Michoacán that ended with civilian casualties." Miguel felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. The cartel was investigating his background more thoroughly than anticipated, which meant his carefully constructed cover identity was being subjected to unprecedented scrutiny. What Salgado couldn't know was that the CIA had prepared for precisely this eventuality, with false records planted so deeply within Mexican military archives that they would withstand all but the most sophisticated digital forensics. "The past is the past," Miguel replied, allowing a calculated flash of regret to cross his features, a psychological touch that the agency's behavioral specialists had determined would resonate with someone of Salgado's profile. "I serve a different purpose now." Outside the cantina, the distinctive sound of another vehicle approaching caught Miguel's attention, though he gave no outward indication of his awareness. Through his agency training, he had developed the ability to track multiple threat vectors simultaneously while maintaining conversational engagement, a skill that had kept him alive through 3 years of deep cover among some of the world's most dangerous criminals. "A different purpose," Salgado repeated, his tone shifting to something more dangerous. "That's what interests El Cuervo. Your apparent talents for logistics, security protocols, and strategic planning. Skills that seem remarkably similar to those employed by certain American agencies we've encountered." The accusation hung in the air like the moment before a lightning strike, not direct enough to demand immediate response, but clear in its implication. Through the concealed communication system in his watch, Miguel could sense the agency's surveillance drones positioned high above the cantina had detected the thermal signatures of additional armed men taking positions around the building's perimeter. What had appeared to be a chance encounter was revealing itself as a carefully orchestrated counterintelligence operation. Yet Miguel remained outwardly calm, 20 years of specialized training keeping his physiological responses in check as he maintained the perfect illusion of a cartel soldier facing uncomfortable but not unexpected scrutiny from a superior. Everything about his posture, facial expressions, and micro-gestures had been calibrated through thousands of hours of deep cover training to project exactly the right balance of concern, respect, and contained confidence. What Salgado and his men couldn't know was that the seemingly ordinary cartel veteran sitting before them had personally overseen the agency's most successful penetrations of terrorist organizations across 3 continents, had received training so classified that fewer than 30 people within the United States government knew of its existence, and possessed psychological countermeasure techniques specifically designed to defeat the kind of interrogation now unfolding. The approaching vehicle drew closer, its engine note distinctive enough for Miguel to identify as a Mercedes G-Wagon, the preferred transportation of only one person in the Aguila Negra hierarchy. El Cuervo himself was arriving, transforming this encounter from a lieutenant's intimidation attempt into something far more significant. The cartel's notorious leader rarely left his compound, and his presence here signaled that Miguel's cover was facing its most serious test since his mission began. The evening air grew thick with tension as the Mercedes G-Wagon came to a precision stop directly in front of La Cantina Escondida. Even the vehicle's positioning spoke volumes to Miguel's trained eye. Optimal for both rapid exit and maximum security coverage, with clear sight lines for the driver and perfect angles for the security team. It was the kind of tactical vehicle placement that Miguel himself had once taught to agency field operatives in high-risk environments. It seems Don Alejandro himself has taken an interest in our conversation, Salgado remarked, a flash of genuine surprise crossing his features. Before he could suppress it, Miguel noted this micro-expression with interest. The lieutenant hadn't expected his boss to appear personally, suggesting that whatever intelligence had triggered this confrontation was more significant than even Salgado had been led to believe. 2 heavily armed men exited the G-Wagon first, taking security positions with a level of professional discipline rarely seen among cartel enforcers. Their movements betrayed specialized training, likely former Mexican special forces or even foreign military contractors. The precision of their security protocol confirmed what agency intelligence had long suspected. El Cuervo was increasingly recruiting from military and law enforcement backgrounds, building a security apparatus that more closely resembled a paramilitary organization than a traditional cartel. The cantina door swung open as Alejandro El Cuervo Dominguez entered with calculated deliberation. Unlike the flashy narco bosses portrayed in popular media, Dominguez presented a study in understated menace. A trim, athletic man in his 50s, wearing simple but exquisitely tailored clothing, his silver-streaked hair cut with military precision. The only visible concession to his extraordinary wealth was a vintage Patek Philippe watch that Miguel estimated was worth more than most of his sicarios would earn in a decade. Miguel Reyes, Dominguez spoke, his voice carrying the cultured accent of someone educated in American universities rather than the streets of Sinaloa. I find you in unexpected company tonight. Every operative instinct in Miguel's body heightened to maximum alertness while maintaining an outward appearance of appropriate deference. Dominguez's unexpected personal appearance transformed the nature of this confrontation from a lieutenant's intimidation attempt to something far more perilous. In 3 years of deep cover work, Miguel had met the cartel leader fewer than a dozen times, always in carefully controlled settings at the main compound. Don Alejandro, Miguel acknowledged, rising from his seat with the perfect balance of respect and confidence that his cover identity demanded. I was just explaining to Don Victor that I'm preparing for tomorrow's meeting at the hacienda. Dominguez studied Miguel with penetrating intensity, his dark eyes betraying nothing of his thoughts. The cartel leader's notorious intelligence had transformed a mid-level smuggling operation into a criminal empire with annual profits exceeding some multinational corporations. That same analytical mind was now focused entirely on Miguel, searching for any inconsistency or weakness. Sit, please, Dominguez gestured, taking the chair across from Miguel, while Salgado visibly bristled at being displaced from his position of dominance. It's fortunate I found you here. There are matters we should discuss before tomorrow's gathering. Isabella moved with the careful precision of someone navigating a minefield, placing a fresh bottle of top-shelf tequila and clean glasses on the table without being asked. Miguel noted the tremor in her hands, subtle but unmistakable. Unlike the local farmers who had fled at Salgado's arrival, Isabella had witnessed enough cartel business to recognize when death might be imminent. What appeared to be a casual conversation between cartel members carried undercurrents that even civilians could sense. "Clear the room," Dominguez ordered without looking at Salgado. "Leave 2 men outside, the rest wait in the vehicles." "Boss, I think I should..." Salgado began, but fell silent at Dominguez's barely perceptible headshake. "I said clear the room, Victor." The absolute authority in Dominguez's quiet command was more effective than any shouted order. Salgado's jaw tightened in barely controlled frustration, but he moved to comply immediately, directing his men outside. With sharp hand gestures, only Isabella remained, frozen behind the bar until Dominguez addressed her directly. "Doña Isabella, you've served this community with discretion for many years. I trust you'll extend that same discretion to our conversation tonight." The elderly woman nodded once before retreating to the far end of the bar, close enough to provide service if requested, but far enough to give the appearance of privacy. Miguel knew that Dominguez never spoke truly sensitive information in the presence of civilians. This positioning was calculated to allow Isabella to hear enough to spread word of the cartel's power, while revealing nothing of operational significance. Dominguez poured tequila into 2 glasses with the deliberate movements of a man in complete control of his environment. 3 years ago, a man with your background and training came to us seeking employment. An experienced operator with tactical skills, but seemingly broken by his dishonorable discharge. Valuable but damaged, the perfect recruit for certain aspects of our business. Miguel accepted the offered glass, taking a measured sip that allowed him to maintain eye contact while projecting the appropriate mix of respect and steady nerves. His specialized agency training included techniques for alcohol consumption during deep cover operations, creating the appearance of drinking matching amounts while actually consuming significantly less than his target. "You've served our organization with notable efficiency," Dominguez continued, studying Miguel over the rim of his glass. "Your input on security protocols has prevented 3 federal raids. Your redesign of our transportation network has reduced interception rates by 62%. Your tactical guidance has eliminated rival operations with minimal losses to our personnel." Miguel recognized the dangerous territory this conversation was entering. His cover identity required him to provide enough genuine value to maintain credibility without actually strengthening the cartel's operations. It was the most delicate balancing act in deep cover work. The CIA wanted him close enough to gather critical intelligence while ensuring his contributions ultimately facilitated the cartel's eventual dismantling rather than its expansion. "I appreciate the opportunities you've provided, Don Alejandro," Miguel responded with careful precision. "I found purpose in your organization when I had nothing else." Dominguez nodded, a calculating smile touching his lips but never reaching his eyes. "Purpose is a powerful motivator, more powerful than money for men like you and me. The question that interests me, Miguel, is exactly what purpose drives you." The question hung in the air like a suspended blade. Through his periphery vision, Miguel catalogued every detail of his surroundings, the positions of Dominguez's remaining security personnel, Isabella's subtle movements behind the bar, the exact distance to exits, potential weapons, and his emergency extraction transmitter concealed within his watch. Thousands of hours of agency training had prepared him for precisely this scenario. a direct challenge to his cover identity by the primary target. Loyalty, Don Alejandro, Miguel answered, allowing genuine emotion to color his voice, a technique CIA psychological operations specialists called emotional transference, using authentic feelings from one's true past to sell a fictional narrative. My country discarded me after 15 years of service. Your organization recognized my value. Dominguez leaned back, studying Miguel with renewed interest. A simple answer, but perhaps too simple for a man of your complexity. Victor believes you might be American law enforcement, DEA perhaps, or possibly FBI. Miguel allowed a flash of genuine indignation to cross his features, controlled but visible. If I were federal, you would have been arrested long before now. Indeed, Dominguez agreed, which is why I dismissed Victor's concerns initially. The Americans lack the sophistication and patience for the kind of deep cover operation he suspects. Their operatives inevitably make critical mistakes within months, not years. Miguel took another measured sip of tequila, his mind racing beneath his calm exterior. The conversation was following a pattern he recognized from agency counterintelligence training. Dominguez was revealing suspicions to observe reactions, while simultaneously dismissing those same suspicions to lower defenses. It was a masterfully executed psychological tactic. However, Dominguez continued, placing a slim leather portfolio on the table between them. Recent events have raised questions that require clarification. With deliberate movements, he opened the portfolio to reveal surveillance photographs that sent a chill through Miguel's carefully maintained composure. The images showed the bodies of 3 men Miguel immediately recognized as members of a rival cartel's intelligence team, men who had been tracking him for months, potentially having identified inconsistencies in his cover identity. 3 weeks ago, these men were found executed in Tijuana, Dominguez explained, his voice clinically detached. Professional work, single shots to the head, no witnesses, no evidence left behind. According to our sources, they had been investigating. Several of our key personnel, including you. Miguel maintained his neutral expression through supreme effort, recognizing the critical juncture this conversation had reached. The men in the photographs had indeed been surveillance specialists from the Los Rojos cartel who had begun tracking his movements with uncomfortable precision. What Dominguez couldn't know was that they had been eliminated not by Águila Negra enforcers, but by a CIA tactical team specifically to protect Miguel's cover. An extraordinary intervention authorized at the highest levels due to the unprecedented intelligence value of his deep cover position. I was unaware of this, Miguel stated with perfect truthfulness. The agency had deliberately kept him uninformed about the elimination operation to maintain the authenticity of exactly this kind of reaction. That's what's most interesting, Dominguez replied, studying Miguel's face with unnerving intensity. These men were eliminated with techniques that match neither our organization's methods nor those of local competitors. The precision, the operational security, the complete absence of witnesses, it bears the hallmarks of a state-sponsored action. Miguel allowed a flicker of genuine concern to show in his expression, an operational necessity rather than a break in his control. The agency's direct intervention, while necessary to protect his cover, had inadvertently created a signature that Dominguez's intelligence network had identified as incongruent with the regional criminal landscape. You believe a government agency eliminated them, Miguel asked, carefully navigating the conversational minefield. Mexican military intelligence, perhaps? Dominguez closed the portfolio with deliberate care. That is one possibility. Another is that these men discovered something significant enough about one of my key personnel that it warranted direct intervention by an outside force with professional capabilities exceeding even our own considerable resources. Miguel recognized the trap being laid before him with expert precision. Dominguez was providing an opportunity for him to redirect suspicion toward another member of the organization, a loyalty test disguised as a confidential exchange between trusted associates. It was exactly the kind of psychological operation Miguel himself had designed during his years with the agency's counterterrorism unit. If someone in the organization has compromised security, they should be identified and dealt with immediately, Miguel responded, threading the needle between appearing appropriately concerned without deflecting suspicion too obviously. But professional elimination of surveillance operators suggests capabilities beyond typical law enforcement. Dominguez's expression remained unreadable as he poured another measure of tequila into both glasses. Indeed, which brings us to tomorrow's meeting at the Hacienda. We will be discussing a significant expansion of our operation into European distribution networks, a move that will place us in direct competition with organizations that have access to former Soviet bloc intelligence resources. This revelation sent Miguel's mind racing with implications. The agency had long suspected Dominguez was planning to challenge the established European distribution networks, but confirmation of this strategic direction represented actionable intelligence of the highest order. If Aguila Negra established direct European distribution channels, bypassing the traditional Mediterranean gatekeepers, it would fundamentally alter the global narcotics landscape. European expansion carries substantial risks, Miguel observed carefully, walking the delicate line between providing genuinely valuable analysis that maintained his cover and subtly undermining the cartel's strategic objectives. The established networks there have political protection that even Aguila Negra might find challenging to overcome, which is precisely why your particular expertise will be valuable in tomorrow's planning session, Dominguez replied, his eyes never leaving Miguel's. Your military background provides perspectives that our traditional business strategists lack. Outside the cantina, the security teams had established a perimeter that Miguel knew would make emergency extraction nearly impossible without substantial bloodshed. Whatever Dominguez's ultimate suspicions, he had effectively isolated Miguel from potential support while maintaining the pretext of a strategic conversation between valued associates. I'm honored by your confidence, Don Alejandro, Miguel responded, maintaining the perfect balance of respectful deference his cover identity demanded. Dominguez stood with fluid grace that belied his age, a movement that caused his security detail to immediately shift to alert readiness. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow at the Hacienda. The full Leadership Council will be present, the first such gathering in over 2 years. Your insights will be significant. The subtle emphasis on those final words carried unmistakable undercurrents. The Leadership Council meeting represented both extraordinary opportunity and extreme danger. The entire command structure of one of the world's most powerful criminal organizations gathered in one location, while simultaneously placing Miguel under the scrutiny of the cartel's most experienced operators. I look forward to contributing to the organization's evolution, Miguel replied, rising from his chair with calculated movements that projected confidence while avoiding any gestures that could be interpreted as threatening by the hypervigilant. "Security team," Dominguez extended his hand, a gesture of respect rarely offered to those outside his inner circle. "Until tomorrow then, Miguel Reyes, if that is truly who you are." The challenge hung in the air between them, both explicit and deniable in the same breath. Miguel accepted the handshake with precisely calibrated pressure, neither submissive nor challenging, while maintaining unwavering eye contact. "I am whoever you need me to be, Don Alejandro," he responded with carefully crafted ambiguity. "As I have been since the day you welcomed me into Águila Negra." As Dominguez and his security detail departed in their precision formation, Miguel remained standing in the now silent cantina. Isabella emerged from the shadows behind the bar, her weathered face etched with the tension of someone who had witnessed. Too many such encounters end in violence. "You walk a dangerous path, soldier," she observed quietly, pouring herself a measure of tequila with a hand that trembled slightly from suppressed adrenaline. "All paths in this territory are dangerous, Doña Isabella," Miguel replied, his mind already processing the operational implications of the coming Leadership Council meeting. If he could transmit confirmation of the gathering to his agency handlers, it would represent an intelligence coup of unprecedented proportions and potentially the culmination of his 3-year deep cover mission. What he couldn't know as he calculated his next moves was that Dominguez had already set in motion a sophisticated counterintelligence operation designed specifically to expose any infiltrators within his organization. A stratagem constructed with the assistance of former intelligence professionals that would test Miguel's cover identity beyond anything his CIA training had prepared him to withstand. We've been breaking down this incredible story for you, and the tension continues to build. If you're just joining us now, subscribe to get notified when we post more content like this. Now, let's get back to Miguel's dangerous situation. The cantina gradually emptied as Isabella began her closing routine with practiced efficiency. Miguel remained at his table, apparently nursing his tequila while his mind calculated precise operational parameters with cold clarity. The Leadership Council meeting represented both unprecedented intelligence opportunity and extreme personal danger. The proverbial double-edged sword of deep cover work. "You should not be here when morning comes," Isabella said quietly as she wiped down the bar. "Men like Dominguez don't make personal visits to deliver simple invitations." Miguel nodded almost imperceptibly. The cantina owner's assessment matched his own. Dominguez's appearance carried significance beyond the stated purpose. Whether it was intended as intimidation, surveillance, or something more complex remained unclear, but the strategic implications demanded immediate response. "I've witnessed many men receive that particular look from El Cuervo," Isabella continued, her gaze distant with unpleasant memories. "Few lived long enough to describe what followed." "Your concern is appreciated, Doña Isabella," Miguel replied, with measured caution. "But I have business that can't be abandoned." The elderly woman's weathered face creased with something between resignation and respect. "Then you'll need this." She reached beneath the counter and extracted a folded piece of paper, sliding it across the bar with deliberate nonchalance. "The servant's entrance to the hacienda compound isn't on any official blueprints. My husband helped build those tunnels before Dominguez converted the property." Miguel accepted the paper without visible reaction, though his mind immediately processed the operational significance of this unexpected asset. Contingency exit routes represented critical infrastructure for any deep cover operation, especially when standard extraction protocols became compromised. He tucked the paper into his pocket with practiced casualness that gave no indication of its extraordinary value. "Your husband built tunnels for the compound?" he asked, calibrating his tone to project nothing more than mild curiosity. Isabella's eyes darkened with old grief. 30 years ago, when Dominguez was still a local businessman with political ambitions, Jorge was the best stonemason in 3 provinces. When the work was complete, Dominguez insisted on paying him personally. A bitter smile touched her lips. "My husband was found 3 days later with his throat cut. The official report called it a robbery." The revelation crystallized something Miguel had suspected. Isabella's careful observation of cartel activities wasn't merely self-preservation, but long-cultivated vengeance. She had positioned herself as the seemingly neutral proprietor of a cartel watering hole specifically to monitor the organization that had murdered her husband. "Why help me?" Miguel asked directly, recognizing that operational security had already been breached between them. If Isabella had identified inconsistencies in his cover identity, others might as well. "Because, unlike the animals who drink here, you carry yourself like a man who answers to something beyond greed and fear," she replied, wiping glasses with methodical precision. "Whatever your true purpose, it can't possibly serve Dominguez's interests, and that makes it worthy of support." Miguel weighed his response carefully, acknowledging her assessment would violate core operational security protocols, but dismissing her insight might eliminate a potentially valuable local asset. It was the kind of field decision that no training manual could fully prepare an operative to make. "Everyone has masters, Doña Isabella," he finally responded, threading the conversational needle with practiced ambiguity. "The only choice we have is which ones we serve." She nodded slowly, accepting his non-answer with the quiet dignity of someone accustomed to navigating dangerous truths. "The North Service Road will be clear for the next hour. Salgado's men are watching the main highway." Miguel stood with deliberate casualness, placing payment for his drinks on the counter with a generous but not suspicious tip. Every movement projected the relaxed confidence of a mid-level cartel operative, preparing for an important meeting, betraying nothing of the strategic calculations racing through his mind. "Gracias por su hospitalidad," he said with formal courtesy, heading toward the door with unhurried steps that nevertheless positioned him optimally for rapid response to potential threats. "Vaya con Dios," Isabella replied softly, the traditional blessing carrying weighted meaning in this context. "Whatever God you truly serve." Outside, the desert night had transformed the landscape. Stars punctured the blackness with crystalline clarity, providing just enough illumination for Miguel to conduct a proper security sweep of his vehicle and the surrounding area without using a flashlight that might give away his position. His movements were precise and economical, betraying years of specialized training while appearing to casual observers as nothing more than a cautious man checking his truck before a night drive. The rutted dirt road leading north from La Cantina, Escondida, offered the perfect tactical advantage. Poor visibility for potential surveillance vehicles, combined with multiple terrain features that would reveal pursuit to a trained observer. Miguel navigated the challenging route with practiced skill, his truck's modified suspension handling the rough terrain while he monitored his surroundings with hypervigilant awareness. When he reached a particular bend in the road, sheltered from view by a natural rock formation, Miguel executed a perfect J-turn and killed the engine. The maneuver, practiced thousands of times during agency tactical driving courses, positioned his vehicle for immediate escape while creating a momentary blind spot that would force any pursuit to either reveal themselves or lose visual contact. In the sudden silence, Miguel activated his secure communication protocol with practiced precision. The watch that appeared ordinary to cartel members contained cutting-edge technology that would make most intelligence agencies envious. A quantum-encrypted burst transmission system capable of sending compressed data packages via satellite. Without conventional electronic signatures, Monarch to base camp, he subvocalized, the ultra-sensitive microphone in his watch capturing his nearly silent words. Priority Alpha communication. Leadership Council confirmed for tomorrow at primary location. All principals expected in attendance. Request updated extraction protocols and surveillance assessment. The transmission completed in less than 2 seconds. The compressed data packet bouncing through 3 separate satellite relays before reaching its CIA destination. The system would require 20 minutes to process a response through similar security protocols, providing Miguel with the necessary window to ensure he hadn't been followed. As he waited in practiced stillness, Miguel reviewed the psychological dimensions of his encounter with Dominguez. The cartel leader's personal appearance at the cantina represented a significant deviation from established patterns, a potential indicator that Miguel's cover identity was facing unprecedented scrutiny. The revelation about the Leadership Council meeting carried dual implications. Either Dominguez genuinely valued Miguel's tactical input for the European expansion, or he was creating an elaborate scenario to test Miguel's loyalty under controlled conditions. The photographs of the eliminated Los Rojos surveillance team presented the most immediate operational concern. The CIA's direct intervention, while necessary to protect his cover, had created a signature inconsistent with regional criminal operations. Dominguez's counterintelligence capabilities, increasingly sophisticated through recruitment of former military and intelligence personnel, had identified the anomaly. The question remaining was whether the cartel leader had connected those dots directly to Miguel or was still searching for the infiltrator within his organization. The watch vibrated with a nearly imperceptible pattern against his wrist, indicating an incoming secure transmission. Miguel activated the reception protocol with a precise series of movements that would appear to casual observers as nothing more than a man checking the time. Base camp to Monarch. The text scrolled across the specialized display concealed within the watch face. Council confirmation, priority intelligence, maintain cover. Extraction assets positioning at secondary locations. New intelligence indicates former Mossad contractor embedded with target. Exercise extreme caution. Authorization for emergency protocols granted if compromise imminent. The reference to a former Mossad contractor sent a chill through Miguel's professional detachment. Israeli intelligence veterans were among the most skilled counterintelligence specialists in the world, particularly those who transitioned to private contracting. If Dominguez had recruited such expertise, it explained the increasingly sophisticated security measures Miguel had observed throughout the organization over recent months. As the message completed its transmission, the watch performed its standard security protocol. permanently erasing all data with a specialized electromagnetic pulse too minor to affect other equipment, but sufficient to destroy the quantum molecular storage medium. The technology, developed through a classified DARPA initiative, represented the cutting edge of field communication security. Miguel restarted his truck and continued along the northern service road, his mind processing tactical implications. With practiced efficiency, the compound's security would be significantly enhanced for the Leadership Council meeting, requiring adjustment to his standard operational parameters. The presence of a counterintelligence specialist with Mossad training introduced variables that exceeded his pre-established contingency planning. After 15 minutes of careful navigation through increasingly rugged terrain, Miguel reached a small plateau that offered both tactical advantage and communication security. The elevated position provided clear sightlines to the valley below, while the surrounding rock formations created natural electromagnetic shielding against conventional surveillance technology. From a hidden compartment beneath his truck's seat, Miguel extracted what appeared to be an ordinary satellite phone, the kind commonly used by remote agricultural operations throughout the region. In reality, the device contained specialized agency technology that allowed secure connection to restricted intelligence databases through constantly shifting encryption protocols. With practiced efficiency, he accessed the classified intelligence repository on known former Mossad contractors currently operating in the private sector. The database, updated weekly and accessible only to field operatives with priority alpha clearance, contained biographical information, known operational signatures, and counterintelligence methodologies for high-value targets. The search parameters. The geographic location, estimated age range, and specialized skill set returned 3 potential matches. Miguel studied each profile with focused concentration, comparing behavioral and operational signatures against the security evolutions he had observed within the Águila Negra organization. The third profile triggered immediate recognition. Elijah Naftali, former Kidon unit operative specializing in counterintelligence and penetration testing, separated from Mossad under classified circumstances 5 years earlier. Last confirmed sighting in Beirut 2 years ago, consulting with an unidentified security organization. Psychological profile indicated exceptional analytical capabilities combined with ruthless operational execution, a particularly dangerous combination for counterintelligence work. A series of surveillance photographs accompanied the profile, and Miguel studied them with professional detachment. The man was in his early 50s, with the physically nondescript appearance that characterized elite intelligence operatives worldwide, the kind of face designed by nature and training to blend into any environment without drawing attention. What struck Miguel most significantly was not what the profile contained, but what it lacked. No confirmed operations in the past 18 months, suggesting either deep cover activity or transition to private consultation for a principal with sufficient resources to ensure complete operational security. Dominguez certainly possessed such resources, and his paranoid security consciousness would make him the ideal client for someone with Naftali's specialized skills. Miguel closed the intelligence file and returned the device to its concealed compartment, his mind calculating new operational parameters with cold precision. If Naftali was indeed consulting for Dominguez, Tomorrow's Leadership Council meeting represented not just an intelligence opportunity, but a sophisticated counterintelligence trap, potentially designed specifically to identify infiltration at the highest levels of the organization. The night air carried a desert chill as Miguel navigated back toward the main highway, his route deliberately circuitous to detect potential surveillance. 3 years of deep cover work had positioned him with unprecedented access to Aguila Negra's strategic operations, but the final phase of his mission now faced a counterintelligence specialist with capabilities matching or exceeding his own. The compound came into view as Miguel crested a hill overlooking the valley, a sprawling hacienda surrounded by meticulously maintained grounds and state-of-the-art security infrastructure disguised as agricultural operations. Floodlights illuminated the perimeter, while surveillance systems more appropriate for military installations than private residences monitored every approach vector. Miguel noted with professional interest that the security posture had already evolved since his last visit 3 weeks earlier. New observation posts positioned at elevated locations, modified patrol patterns that eliminated predictable timing, and thermal imaging systems integrated with the perimeter lighting, all indicating the hand of someone with formal counterintelligence training. Naftali's influence was already evident in the compound's defensive preparations. As he continued toward his modest safe house in Villa Oscura, Miguel conducted a comprehensive mental review of his cover identity's infrastructure. The CIA had constructed Miguel Reyes with meticulous attention to detail. Military service records planted in secured Mexican databases, criminal history established across multiple jurisdictions, financial transactions creating a paper trail extending back 15 years, and even manufactured relationships with individuals who believed they had known him for decades. The question was whether such careful preparation, no matter how thorough, could withstand scrutiny from someone with Naftali's specialized training in identifying deep cover operatives. Counterintelligence at this level became a chess match between opposing specialists, each attempting to identify the microscopic inconsistencies that inevitably existed in even the most carefully constructed cover identities. Miguel's safe house appeared exactly as he had left it that morning, a modest residence appropriate for a mid-level cartel operative who preferred practical security over ostentatious display. The building's unremarkable exterior concealed sophisticated security measures and communication equipment that would have impressed even agency technical specialists. After conducting a thorough security sweep using both traditional methods and specialized technology, Miguel entered the residence through a side door that provided optimal cover from potential observation points. The interior remained exactly as he had arranged it, with no indications of unauthorized entry, according to the nearly invisible security measures he maintained. In the Spartan bedroom, Miguel activated his secure terminal through a series of authentication protocols that included biometric verification and cognitive pattern recognition. The system required specific thought processes to accompany the physical authentication, a cutting-edge security measure developed specifically for deep cover operatives facing sophisticated counterintelligence threat. The terminal connected to a specialized agency database containing psychological profiles of counterintelligence specialists worldwide. Miguel navigated directly to Naftali's extended assessment, searching for operational vulnerabilities that might provide advantage in tomorrow's high-stakes encounter. What he found offered both challenge and opportunity. Naftali's psychological profile indicated exceptional analytical capabilities, but also noted a particular operational signature. The Israeli specialist preferred elaborate counterintelligence scenarios designed to trigger emotional responses rather than simple loyalty tests. He constructed situations that placed suspected infiltrators under extreme psychological pressure, creating conditions where maintaining cover required perfect emotional control rather than merely consistent biographical details. This insight provided Miguel with critical operational guidance. Tomorrow's Leadership Council meeting would likely include carefully orchestrated psychological triggers designed specifically to provoke emotional reactions inconsistent with his cover identity. The standard agency protocol for such scenarios emphasized cognitive discipline and emotional detachment, maintaining cover through rigid adherence to established behavioral parameters. But Miguel recognized that standard protocols might prove insufficient against Naftali's specialized methodology. Emotional detachment itself could become a tell against a counterintelligence specialist trained to identify precisely such controlled responses. The most effective defense might require the opposite approach: calibrated emotional reactions that appeared authentic rather than the absence of emotional response that characterized most trained operatives under pressure. This realization represented both professional challenge and personal risk. Allowing genuine emotional engagement while maintaining operational security required a psychological balance few operatives could successfully navigate. The agency's training emphasized emotional compartmentalization, specifically because the alternative created unpredictable variables that could compromise mission integrity. Yet, as Miguel reviewed Naftali's operational history, he became increasingly convinced that conventional counterintelligence defenses would prove ineffective against the Israeli specialists' methodology. Success would require something beyond standard agency protocols, a hybrid approach that incorporated authentic emotional elements within strictly controlled operational parameters. Tomorrow's Leadership Council meeting would determine not just the success of his 3-year mission, but likely his survival as well. The intelligence value of confirming Águila Negra's European expansion strategy justified extreme operational risk. But Miguel harbored no illusions about extraction possibilities if his cover was compromised during a gathering of the cartel's entire leadership structure. As he prepared his equipment and mentally rehearsed contingency scenarios, Miguel acknowledged the cold calculus of deep cover operations. The agency valued the intelligence he provided, but operated under strict risk assessment protocols. If his cover was compromised, extraction resources would be deployed only if the operational risk remained within acceptable parameters. If those parameters were exceeded, the agency's priority would shift from extraction to ensuring he couldn't be leveraged for counterintelligence value. The specialized pill concealed within his watch represented that final contingency, an advanced neurotoxin that would ensure rapid, painless death while degrading brain tissue to prevent post-mortem chemical interrogation techniques. It was the contingency every deep cover operative acknowledged, but few directly contemplated. the final protocol when all other options were exhausted. Miguel closed the secure terminal and began methodical preparations for tomorrow's meeting. His movements precise and economical, despite the weight of understanding exactly what hung in the balance. The mission had reached its most dangerous phase, with unprecedented intelligence value juxtaposed against equally unprecedented personal risk. What Dominguez and his Israeli counterintelligence specialist couldn't possibly know was that Miguel Reyes wasn't merely a CIA operative. He was the agency's most successful deep cover specialist, with infiltration accomplishments across 3 continents that remained classified at the highest levels. His psychological training included specialized techniques developed specifically for countering elite counterintelligence methodologies. Tomorrow's Leadership Council meeting would become a silent, invisible battlefield between opposing intelligence specialists, a psychological chess match where the stakes included not just Miguel's life, but potentially the strategic direction of one of the world's most dangerous criminal organizations. As he completed his preparations and initiated sleep protocols designed to ensure optimal cognitive function, Miguel embraced the cold certainty of professional purpose that had defined his career. The most dangerous operations were often those where both success and failure carried extraordinary consequences. Tomorrow would determine which outcome awaited him at the Hacienda compound, where Aguila Negra's leadership would gather, unaware that the seemingly ordinary cartel veteran they had invited into their midst represented the culmination of one of the most ambitious deep cover operations in CIA history. The Desert Dawn broke with cold precision, painting the Sierra Madre in shades of amber and gold that belied the deadly calculations unfolding beneath the surface beauty. Miguel rose from his precisely timed sleep cycle, 4 hours of pharmacologically optimized rest that provided maximum cognitive function without the grogginess of deeper sleep patterns. The practice, developed during his special activities, division training, had sustained him through combat zones and deep cover operations across 3 continents. His morning routine projected exactly the image his cover identity required. The disciplined habits of a former military operator blended with the practical paranoia of a cartel lieutenant. Every movement served dual purposes, maintaining his physical readiness while reinforcing the behavioral patterns expected of Miguel Reyes, disgraced Special Forces veteran turned valued cartel asset. The hidden chamber beneath the kitchen floor contained his most sensitive operational equipment, specialized weapons, communication devices, and tactical gear that would immediately identify him as something far more dangerous than a mid-level cartel operative. Miguel accessed the compartment through a biometrically secured system disguised as an ordinary floor tile. From this hidden arsenal, he selected only what was absolutely necessary for today's high-stakes operation. The ceramic blade taped against his lower back would evade metal detectors. The watch, containing both emergency communication capabilities and last resort suicide protocols, remained on his wrist. The modified belt buckle concealed specialized counter-surveillance technology that could detect most electronic monitoring without revealing itself. Everything else, including his standard-issue encrypted satellite communication device and agency-modified firearms, remained secured in the hidden compartment. Bringing any unauthorized technology into the Hacienda compound would trigger Dominguez's increasingly sophisticated security protocols, especially with Naftali's counterintelligence expertise now in the equation. Miguel dressed with deliberate, with care, selecting clothing appropriate for his cover identity. Quality materials, but nothing ostentatious. The wardrobe of a professional who valued function over display. The silver chain around his neck carried a modest St. Michael medallion, patron saint of soldiers and a common token among Mexican military veterans. What security personnel wouldn't detect was the specialized alloy within the medallion that could, if necessary, be weaponized in at least 3 different ways, according to agency field manuals. After activating all safe house security protocols, Miguel drove toward the hacienda compound via the main access road. His approach was deliberately transparent. No evasive routing or counter-surveillance techniques that might trigger suspicion. The Leadership Council meeting provided legitimate reason for his presence, and any deviation from expected patterns might alert Dominguez's security apparatus. The compound's main entrance featured enhanced security protocols that confirmed Miguel's tactical assessment from the previous night. 2 new checkpoint positions, integrated biometric scanning disguised as routine identity verification, and increased personnel with the distinctive bearing of professional security contractors rather than standard cartel enforcers. Miguel navigated the security measures with practiced ease, presenting documentation and submitting to verification procedures with the cooperative efficiency of someone accustomed to such protocols. His demeanor projected neither the nervousness of someone with something to hide, nor the excessive confidence that often betrayed undercover operatives trying too hard to appear legitimate. "Arms out for scanning," instructed the security operator. At the final checkpoint, a man whose Israeli accent and specialized training were immediately apparent to Miguel's experienced ear. This would be one of Naftali's personal selections, not a standard cartel security asset. The scanning device resembled standard security wands used at government buildings worldwide, but Miguel recognized the specialized configuration that indicated advanced capabilities beyond mere metal detection. The technology could identify specialized communications equipment, unusual power sources, and even certain chemical compounds associated with intelligence agency operations. The security specialist conducted the scan with methodical precision, paying particular attention to Miguel's watch and belt, the items most likely to contain concealed technology. The agency's technical division had anticipated such scrutiny, however, designing Miguel's equipment to appear as ordinary consumer electronics to all but the most advanced detection systems. "You've been reassigned to the East Conference Room," the security specialist informed him after completing the scan. "Report there immediately." The deviation from standard protocol triggered Miguel's heightened situational awareness. Previous Leadership Council meetings had always been held in the hacienda's main hall, a space specifically designed for large gatherings with careful attention to security parameters. The East Conference Room was smaller, more contained, with limited escape routes, an ideal setting for a controlled counterintelligence operation. "Of course," Miguel acknowledged with appropriate deference. "Any particular reason for the change?" The security specialist's expression remained professionally neutral. "Not my concern. I just verify and direct." As Miguel followed the indicated path through the hacienda's manicured grounds, his tactical mind calculated new variables with cold precision. The venue change significantly altered his operational parameters, potentially compromising pre-established emergency protocols while creating a more controlled environment for whatever scenario Dominguez and Naftali had constructed. The compound's architecture reflected its dual nature as both luxury residence and fortified command center. Behind the aesthetic of a traditional Mexican hacienda lay cutting-edge security infrastructure, surveillance systems integrated into decorative elements, defensive positions disguised as architectural features, and evacuation routes concealed. Within seemingly ordinary structures, two men flanked the entrance to the East Conference Room, not Águila Negra's typical sicarios, but specialized security contractors with the distinctive physical bearing of former military operators. Their positioning was textbook counterintelligence protocol, optimal for both controlling access and preventing unauthorized exit. Miguel Reyes reporting as instructed, he stated with professional clarity. The security operators conducted another, more targeted security scan before opening the heavy wooden door. The thoroughness of the procedure confirmed Miguel's assessment. This wasn't standard security protocol, but specialized counterintelligence methodology, likely implemented. Under Naftali's direction, the East Conference Room presented a study in calculated intimidation. Instead of the full leadership council Miguel had been led to expect, only 3 individuals awaited his arrival. Alejandro Dominguez, seated at the head of a massive oak table, Victor Salgado positioned to his right, and a third man Miguel immediately identified from intelligence photographs as Elijah Naftali. Miguel, welcome, Dominguez greeted with practiced cordiality that did nothing to soften the predatory calculation evident in his eyes. I apologize for the change in venue. Our plans have been adjusted. Of course, Don Alejandro, Miguel responded with exactly the right balance of respect and professional composure his cover identity demanded. I'm at your service. Naftali studied Miguel with clinical detachment, his expression betraying nothing, but his eyes missing nothing. In his early 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and unremarkable features, the former Mossad operative presented the perfect physical anonymity that elite intelligence professionals cultivated. Nothing about his appearance would register in most people's memory, a tactical advantage in his profession. Please sit. Dominguez indicated the chair directly across from Naftali. The positioning was deliberate, optimal for behavioral, observation and micro-expression analysis. This wasn't merely a meeting. It was a structured interrogation, disguised as a strategic briefing. Miguel took the indicated seat with natural movements that betrayed none of the heightened tactical awareness racing through his mind. The room's configuration offered minimal exit options, a deliberate choice that further confirmed the counterintelligence nature of this encounter. I believe you're familiar with our business expansion strategies, Dominguez began, his tone conversational but his eyes vigilant. The European distribution networks we discussed yesterday present particular security challenges. Yes, Don Alejandro, Miguel acknowledged. The established Mediterranean cartels have decades of entrenchment and political protection that complicate market entry. Salgado leaned forward, his posture aggressive, which is why security protocols for this phase are critical. One compromised operator could collapse the entire European initiative. The subtext was unmistakable. This conversation wasn't about European distribution networks, but about identifying potential security breaches within Águila Negra's inner circle. Miguel recognized the methodology, beginning with legitimate operational discussions to establish baseline behavioral patterns before transitioning to more targeted counterintelligence probes. Comprehensive vetting is essential, Miguel offered, providing the professional insight his cover identity would be expected to contribute. European. Law enforcement cooperates across borders more effectively than their American counterparts. Naftali spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the distinctive cadence of someone who had learned multiple languages through formal training rather than natural exposure. Tell me, Mr. Reyes, in your professional assessment, what represents the greatest vulnerability in an organization's security infrastructure? The question was precisely calibrated, seemingly operational in nature, but designed to elicit psychological insights. Miguel recognized the technique from his own counterintelligence training. How a subject answered revealed more about their own security consciousness than whatever operational insight they provided. People are always the greatest vulnerability, Miguel replied, offering the authentic perspective of both his true and cover identities. Advanced technology and sophisticated protocols can be compromised through human error or deliberate betrayal. Naftali nodded slightly, his expression revealing nothing while his eyes catalogued every micro-expression crossing Miguel's face. An astute observation. And how would you identify such human vulnerabilities within an organization of this complexity? The question represented a dangerous escalation, moving from general security philosophy to specific counterintelligence methodologies. Miguel calculated his response carefully, balancing the expertise his cover identity would reasonably possess against the specialized knowledge that might betray his true background. Pattern disruption analysis, he answered after a precisely calibrated pause. People operating with hidden agendas eventually deviate from established behavioral patterns. The key is establishing accurate behavioral baselines before attempting to identify anomalies. Something flickered across Naftali's expression. Professional recognition, perhaps, or tactical reassessment. The Israeli specialist leaned back, slightly, his posture shifting from active interrogation to more passive observation. Dominguez intervened with calculated precision. Which brings us to the purpose of today's adjusted meeting. We've identified potential security vulnerabilities that require immediate attention. Miguel maintained his professional composure while mentally recalibrating operational parameters. The scenario was unfolding exactly as his tactical assessment had predicted, a controlled counterintelligence operation rather than the Leadership Council meeting initially described. "I'm at your disposal, Don Alejandro," he stated with appropriate deference, neither offering unnecessary information nor appearing reluctant to engage. 3 weeks ago, Dominguez continued, sliding a folder across the polished table surface, an operation against Los Rojos surveillance team was conducted with methodology inconsistent with our standard security protocols. Miguel opened the folder to find comprehensive forensic documentation of the CIA intervention he had previously been unaware of. Ballistic analysis, time of death calculations, and detailed scene reconstruction that went far beyond standard cartel intelligence. Gathering capabilities. Naftali's influence was evident in the methodical professional analysis more typical of state intelligence agencies than criminal organizations. These men were monitoring several of our key personnel, Dominguez explained, watching Miguel's reaction with predatory intensity. The professional nature of their elimination suggests capabilities beyond typical cartel resources. Miguel studied the documentation with appropriate professional interest, allowing genuine surprise at the thoroughness of the analysis while maintaining the composed demeanor his cover identity demanded. The agency's intervention to protect his cover had inadvertently created the very vulnerability now threatening to expose him. The precision suggests military or intelligence training, he observed, offering legitimate analysis that acknowledged the obvious without implicating himself. Single-shot neutralization, no collateral damage, no witnesses, not typical cartel methodology. Naftali's eyes never left Miguel's face. The question becomes who would have both the capability and motivation to eliminate a surveillance team monitoring Águila Negra personnel. The Israeli's statement hung in the air like a suspended blade. Miguel recognized the interrogation technique, presenting evidence that suggested a specific conclusion while observing how the subject responded to implicit accusation. His agency training had prepared him for precisely this scenario. Mexican military intelligence, perhaps, Miguel suggested, redirecting suspicion without appearing defensive. They've been recruiting former special forces operators for their cartel interdiction units, or possibly a rival organization with resources beyond Los Rojos. Salgado leaned forward aggressively, or perhaps American intelligence with an asset to protect. The accusation was now explicit, the counterintelligence operation moving into its confrontational phase. Miguel allowed an expression of genuine surprise to cross his features, followed by professional reassessment. Exactly the pattern his cover identity would display when confronted with unexpected operational information. American intelligence, he repeated, his tone shifting to analytical consideration rather than defensive denial. That would explain the operational precision. But why target Los Rojos surveillance rather than Águila Negra directly? And which American agency would have the operational approval for wet work on Mexican soil? His questions represented the perfect tactical response, neither denying the plausibility of American involvement nor becoming defensively focused on the implicit accusation against himself. Instead, he engaged with the scenario as a professional, security consultant would, analyzing operational patterns and strategic implications. Dominguez and Naftali exchanged a glance that carried unmistakable significance. Miguel's response had deviated from their expected pattern. The Israeli specialist's expression suggested recalculation of his counterintelligence approach. "Let us be direct, Mr. Reyes," Naftali stated, abandoning the indirect approach for more confrontational methodology. "Your rise within this organization has been unusually rapid. Your tactical contributions have been valuable, but often implemented in ways that ultimately compromised certain operations while appearing successful on the surface." The accusation was both precise and dangerously accurate. Miguel had indeed calibrated his contributions to provide enough value to maintain his cover while subtly undermining the cartel's most destructive operations. The delicate balancing act required of deep cover operatives. "I've served Águila Negra with absolute loyalty," Miguel responded, allowing controlled indignation to color his voice. Not excessive defensiveness, but the natural reaction of a professional whose integrity had been questioned. "Every tactical adjustment I've recommended was based on maximizing operational security while minimizing unnecessary exposure." Salgado slammed his hand on the table, his composure breaking in contrast to Naftali's clinical detachment. "The Americans have infiltrated every major cartel operation in Mexico. Why would Águila Negra be different? Miguel recognized the tactical approach, Salgado playing the aggressive interrogator while Naftali observed his reactions to emotional provocation. It was textbook counterintelligence methodology, one he had employed himself during his agency. Guerrilla, because Don Alejandro's security protocols are superior, Miguel countered with calm precision. The organization's compartmentalized structure and advanced vetting procedures make deep infiltration extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible. Naftali's expression shifted subtly, professional recognition rather than suspicion. Miguel had offered the exact analysis a security specialist would provide, neither defensive about the accusation nor dismissive of the organization's vulnerabilities. An assessment I share, the Israeli stated quietly, which makes the operational anomalies surrounding certain recent events all the more concerning. Dominguez leaned forward, his calculated charm replaced by the cold precision that had built his criminal empire. Perhaps a more practical demonstration will clarify matters. Victor, bring in our guest. The conference room door opened to reveal Salgado's security team escorting a battered, bloodied figure that Miguel recognized with carefully concealed shock. Carlos Mendez, a DEA deep cover operative who had infiltrated one of Aguilar Negra's subsidiary distribution networks 18. Months earlier, Miguel had been briefed on the DEA operation before his own insertion, but had maintained operational separation to prevent compromise of either mission. Mendez's condition revealed extensive physical interrogation, systematic torture conducted with professional efficiency rather than cartel brutality. His vacant eyes and irregular breathing patterns suggested chemical interrogation as well, likely advanced compounds developed for intelligence agencies and now available on specialized black markets. Our colleague was kind enough to share some interesting insights about American law enforcement penetration of our organization, Dominguez explained, observing Miguel with predatory intensity, including certain indicators that helped us identify potential infiltration patterns. Miguel processed this development with cold, tactical precision while maintaining his outward composure. Mendez's compromise represented a catastrophic security breach for American intelligence operations throughout the region. If the DEA operative had revealed knowledge of other agency operations, Miguel's cover identity might already be compromised beyond salvage. Infiltration at the distribution level is always a risk, Miguel observed with professional detachment, neither acknowledging recognition of Mendez nor displaying excessive disinterest that might trigger suspicion. Local recruitment creates inherent security vulnerabilities. Naftali studied Miguel's reaction with clinical precision. Mr. Mendez provided detailed insights into DEA operational methodology, including their deep cover protocols and communication systems. Most illuminating, the Israeli statement carried dual implications, both revealing the extent of information extracted from Mendez and suggesting they now possessed counterintelligence tools to identify similar infiltration attempts. Miguel recognized the psychological pressure being applied, the implication that they had methodology to expose him if he were indeed an American operative. Dominguez rose from his chair with deliberate menace, which brings us to the true purpose of today's meeting, Miguel. We have reason to believe that American intelligence has placed a high-level asset within our organization's strategic operations. Someone with military background and specialized training someone who has gained extraordinary access in a remarkably short period. The accusation hung in the air between them, explicit now rather than implied. Miguel recognized the critical juncture this operation had reached, the point where standard counterintelligence procedures transitioned from assessment to active exposure. His response in the next few moments would likely determine not just his mission's success, but his survival as well. Miguel maintained absolute stillness in the face of Dominguez's accusation, allowing only his eyes to shift from the cartel leader to the broken figure of Carlos Mendez. The DEA operative's vacant stare betrayed the extensive chemical interrogation he had endured, his mind likely reduced to fragmented consciousness through a combination of specialized compounds and professional torture techniques. "Someone with access to our strategic planning," Dominguez continued, stalking the perimeter of the conference table with predatory deliberation. "Someone who has contributed valuable insights while somehow ensuring certain operations face unexpected complications." Miguel recognized the escalating threat matrix unfolding before him. The scenario had transitioned from counterintelligence assessment to active accusation, compressed into a timeline far more accelerated than standard operational protocols would suggest. Whatever intelligence had triggered this confrontation, it carried sufficient weight to override Naftali's typically methodical approach. "I understand your concerns, Don Alejandro," Miguel responded with calculated precision, his tone balanced between professional respect and appropriate indignation. "Security breaches present existential threats to any organization, but accusations require evidence, not just suspicion." Naftali's expression remained clinically detached, but Miguel detected the subtle shift in his posture, the nearly imperceptible adjustment indicating tactical reassessment. The Israeli specialist was processing Miguel's response against anticipated behavioral patterns, recalibrating his counterintelligence approach in real time. "Evidence," Dominguez echoed, the single word carrying lethal implications as he returned to his seat. "Mr. Naftali specializes in precisely that discipline." The former Mossad operative opened a leather portfolio with deliberate economy of movement. "Pattern analysis reveals instructive anomalies, Mr. Reyes. Your operational recommendations consistently demonstrate exceptional tactical insight while simultaneously introducing subtle vulnerabilities." A fascinating contradiction. Miguel allowed a flicker of genuine confusion to cross his features, not performative defense, but calculated engagement with the accusation. "I've dedicated 3 years to strengthening Águila Negra's security infrastructure. If specific recommendations created unintended vulnerabilities, I need to understand where my analysis failed." The response represented perfect tactical positioning, neither defensive denial nor aggressive counteraccusation, but the professional engagement of a security specialist confronting potential flaws in his methodology. It was precisely the reaction his cover identity demanded. "Consider the Tijuana distribution network restructuring," Naftali continued, removing a document from his portfolio. "Your recommendations improved operational efficiency by 28%, while simultaneously creating surveillance opportunities that Mexican federal authorities exploited 3 months later. The example was precisely chosen, a legitimate operational success that had indeed created exploitable intelligence vulnerabilities, exactly as Miguel had intended. The agency had utilized those vulnerabilities to map Águila Negra's northern, distribution infrastructure without compromising his deep cover position. The geographic consolidation created efficiency, but reduced compartmentalization, Miguel acknowledged, offering the authentic analysis his cover identity would provide. A calculated risk that prioritized operational capacity over maximum security. The subsequent federal interdiction represented a failure in my risk assessment. Salgado leaned forward aggressively. A failure or deliberate compromise? Miguel met the lieutenant's accusation with measured confidence, neither escalating the confrontation nor displaying defensive evasion. Every security professional balances operational effectiveness against risk mitigation. If my judgment was flawed in this instance, I accept full responsibility for the oversight. Naftali studied Miguel with renewed intensity, his eyes cataloging micro-expressions and physiological responses with professional precision. Responsible professionals learn from failures, yet similar patterns appear across multiple operations over the past 18 months. Statistical analysis suggests something beyond coincidental misjudgment. The accusation carried surgical precision that Miguel recognized as the product of sophisticated counterintelligence methodology. Naftali had identified the subtle pattern in his operational recommendations, the carefully calibrated balance between providing genuine value to maintain cover while creating exploitable vulnerabilities for agency intelligence gathering. Statistical anomalies warrant investigation, Miguel acknowledged, engaging with the accusation on professional terms rather than personal defense. I would appreciate reviewing the complete analysis to identify potential systemic flaws in my security methodology. The response represented perfect tactical positioning, demonstrating professional interest in addressing legitimate concerns while subtly challenging Naftali to produce comprehensive evidence rather than selected examples. It projected exactly the confidence of a security specialist with nothing to hide, while buying critical moments to assess the full scope of their counterintelligence case. Dominguez's expression hardened with lethal calculation. Mr. Mendez provided fascinating insights into American intelligence methodology, particularly the CIA's deep cover protocols, which apparently differ significantly from DEA approaches. The statement carried devastating implications. If Mendez had indeed revealed CIA operational methodologies under interrogation, Miguel's cover identity faced unprecedented scrutiny from a counterintelligence specialist now armed with insider knowledge of agency protocols. The CIA operates with entirely different parameters than law enforcement agencies, Miguel observed with professional detachment, offering legitimate analysis that acknowledged the obvious without personal connection. Their infiltration approaches would necessarily reflect their intelligence-gathering priorities rather than prosecution objectives. Naftali nodded slightly, the gesture carrying professional recognition rather than agreement. Indeed, Mr. Mendez described specialized psychological training designed to maintain deep cover integrity under precisely this kind of interrogation. Fascinating techniques for emotional compartmentalization and response management. The Israelis' statement represented a sophisticated counterintelligence trap, revealing knowledge of agency methodology while studying Miguel's reaction to information that would trigger recognition in a CIA operative but mean little to the genuine cartel. Lieutenant, his cover identity presented Miguel processed this dangerous escalation with cold tactical precision, calculating his response against both his cover requirements and the Israelis' likely expectations. The standard agency protocol would recommend neutral acknowledgement without engagement, neither confirming familiarity nor displaying excessive disinterest. Instead, Miguel chose a more nuanced approach based on his assessment of Naftali's counterintelligence methodology. Intelligence agencies worldwide develop specialized compartmentalization techniques. He responded with the casual confidence of a security professional discussing general methodology rather than personal experience. Emotional control under interrogation has been standard training since the Cold War. The response demonstrated professional knowledge appropriate for his cover identity's military background, while avoiding the specific recognition patterns that would betray agency affiliation. It was a calibrated risk, acknowledging broadly known tradecraft while maintaining the precise psychological distance his cover required. Cold War methodologies, Naftali repeated with subtle emphasis, his eyes never leaving Miguel's face. An interesting historical reference point. Miguel recognized the probe for what it was, testing for anachronistic knowledge that might reveal intelligence training from a specific era. The CIA had updated its deep cover psychological protocols 3 years earlier, transitioning from compartmentalization-based approaches to integrated identity methodologies. A genuine agency operative trained under the older system might have reacted differently to Naftali's reference. The fundamentals haven't changed significantly, Miguel replied with calculated precision. Whether it's the KGB's Active Measures Department or modern intelligence services, the psychological principles remain relatively consistent. Something shifted in Naftali's expression, not suspicion, but professional reassessment. Miguel had navigated the counterintelligence probe with exactly the right balance of general knowledge and specific detachment his cover identity required. Dominguez interrupted with calculated impatience. These theoretical discussions, while intellectually stimulating, don't address our immediate security concerns. We need certainty, not academic analysis. The cartel leader's intervention carried strategic purpose beyond mere impatience. Miguel recognized the psychological technique, transitioning from intellectual engagement to immediate threat, designed to trigger stress responses that might break carefully maintained composure. I agree completely, Don Alejandro, Miguel responded, with appropriate deference that nonetheless contained professional confidence. If there are specific concerns about my loyalty or effectiveness, I welcome direct evaluation rather than theoretical assessment. Salgado's expression darkened with barely controlled aggression. Direct evaluation? Like what we provided for Mendez? The threat hung explicitly in the air between them, physical interrogation and chemical intervention, as the next phase if this counterintelligence assessment proved inconclusive. Miguel recognized the critical juncture the operation had reached, calculating response options against rapidly evolving threat parameters. Mr. Mendez is clearly a federal operative, Miguel observed with calculated precision. His infiltration represents a legitimate security breach requiring appropriate response. I'm simply suggesting that my 3 years of demonstrable loyalty merit more substantive evidence before reaching similar conclusions. The response represented perfect tactical positioning, acknowledging the legitimacy of security concerns while subtly challenging the equivalence between Mendez's position and his own. It projected neither defensive fear nor aggressive confidence, but the measured response of a professional engaging with serious accusations through evidence-based assessment. Demonstrable loyalty, Naftali repeated with clinical detachment, an interesting choice of words. Loyalty demonstrated through actions that consistently produced dual outcomes. Tactical improvements, coupled with subtle, exploitable vulnerabilities. Miguel recognized the precision of the Israelis' counterintelligence assessment. Naftali had identified the fundamental pattern in his operational recommendations, without yet assembling conclusive evidence of his true identity. The confrontation had reached its most dangerous phase, where professional suspicion existed without actionable proof. If my recommendations have inadvertently created vulnerabilities, I need to understand the specific patterns to address. Systemic flaws in my methodology, Miguel stated with professional clarity. Security isn't abstract theory, but practical implementation. Show me where specific operations were compromised, and I'll demonstrate where my risk calculations failed or succeeded. The challenge was precisely calibrated, displaying appropriate professional concern while subtly forcing Naftali to reveal exactly how much concrete evidence they possessed beyond statistical pattern analysis. It represented calculated risk, but Miguel's tactical assessment suggested the Israeli had identified suspicious patterns without assembling definitive proof of agency affiliation. Dominguez and Naftali exchanged a glance, weighted with unspoken significance. The cartel leader nodded slightly, granting some predetermined authorization to the counterintelligence specialist. Very well, Naftali acknowledged, producing a tablet computer from his portfolio. Perhaps a more direct approach will prove. Illuminating, the Israeli activated the device and placed it on the table before Miguel. The screen displayed satellite surveillance imagery of a remote location Miguel instantly recognized, despite his carefully controlled expression. The emergency extraction point designated for his operation, located in an abandoned mining complex near the United States border. 3 days ago, unusual activity was detected at this location, Naftali explained, studying Miguel's reaction with predatory focus. Specialized equipment deployment consistent with extraction preparation protocols. Quite similar to methodologies Mr. Mendez described as standard CIA contingency implementation. The revelation sent cold calculation racing through Miguel's tactical assessment. The agency had activated emergency extraction protocols without notifying him, a development that could only mean his cover had been compromised through channels outside his awareness. The satellite imagery confirmed his worst-case scenario. His mission had been deemed compromised at the highest levels, triggering autonomous extraction preparations without operative consultation. An abandoned mining operation, Miguel observed, with casual interest, betraying none of the strategic implications racing through his mind. Cartels often use such locations for distribution staging. Los Zetas controlled several similar sites along the northern corridor before their organization fragmented. The response demonstrated appropriate professional knowledge while displaying neither recognition nor excessive dismissal. Exactly the reaction his cover identity would produce when shown an unfamiliar location with potential tactical significance. Indeed, Naftali agreed with clinical precision. Yet this particular site shows activity patterns inconsistent with cartel operations, specialized communications equipment, tactical positioning protocols, deployment methodologies that match neither Mexican cartel nor federal operational signatures. Miguel allowed his expression to shift to professional, analytical interest rather than personal concern. American intervention, perhaps? DEA or possibly Joint Task Force operations preparing for enforcement action? The question represented perfect tactical repositioning, engaging with the evidence as a security professional while subtly redirecting suspicion from CIA-specific operations to broader American law enforcement activities. It acknowledged the obvious implications of the evidence while maintaining precisely the psychological distance his cover identity required. Possibly, Naftali conceded, though his tone suggested professional skepticism. Though the operational signature more closely resembles intelligence extraction protocols than law enforcement interdiction preparation. Dominguez leaned forward with predatory intensity. The location is 38 kilometers from property registered to a corporation. We've identified as a likely CIA front operation. The timing coincides precisely with our discovery of Mendez's true identity and subsequent interrogation. The correlation carried devastating implications that Miguel processed with cold, tactical precision. The agency had likely detected Mendez's compromise through independent intelligence channels and activated standard extraction protocols for all regional assets, including emergency preparations for Miguel's exfiltration without compromising his cover by direct contact. A concerning development that warrants immediate security response, Miguel acknowledged with professional precision. If American intelligence has compromised our border operations, we need to implement countermeasures immediately. The response demonstrated perfect cover integrity, engaging with the security implications while maintaining appropriate psychological distance from the extraction site's true purpose. It projected neither defensive evasion nor excessive interest, but the measured analysis of a security professional confronting potential organizational vulnerability. We've already implemented appropriate measures, Dominguez stated with lethal finality. The site is under continuous surveillance. Any attempt to utilize whatever capabilities have been positioned there will be met with overwhelming force. The statement confirmed Miguel's tactical assessment. The extraction point was compromised, eliminating his primary emergency protocol should his cover fail. Whatever contingency the agency had prepared now represented a monitored trap rather than viable escape route. A prudent precaution, Miguel agreed with professional approval, though I'd recommend against direct confrontation if American intelligence is indeed involved. Diplomatic complications could undermine the European expansion initiative far more effectively than operational interdiction. The recommendation represented both legitimate security advice and tactical necessity, redirecting Águila Negra's response away from direct confrontation that might eliminate his remaining extraction options while providing genuinely valuable strategic counsel that maintained his cover identity's credibility. Naftali studied Miguel with renewed intensity, his expression betraying nothing while his eyes catalogued every micro-expression and physiological response. Your analytical focus remains consistently oriented toward organizational preservation rather than personal concern, Mr. Reyes. A commendable professional quality that appears across all our interactions. The observation carried the precision of elite counterintelligence methodology, identifying the pattern of psychological response that characterized Miguel's operational approach while acknowledging the professional consistency that made definitive judgment challenging. It revealed both Naftali's exceptional capability and the current limitations of his assessment. Security professionals must prioritize organizational interests above personal considerations, Miguel responded with measured confidence. Individual concerns create vulnerabilities that compromise objective risk assessment. The statement represented both legitimate security philosophy and tactical necessity, reinforcing his cover identity's professional credibility while explaining the emotional detachment that might otherwise trigger counterintelligence suspicion. It was precisely calculated to align with both his authentic agency training and his carefully constructed cover personality. Dominguez exchanged another weighted glance with Naftali, communication passing between them that transcended verbal exchange. The cartel leader's expression shifted to calculated decision rather than investigative assessment. We face a critical security juncture that requires absolute certainty, Dominguez stated with cold finality. Mr. Naftali has recommended a specialized verification protocol to resolve remaining questions about your true allegiance, Miguel. The statement confirmed Miguel's tactical assessment. The counterintelligence operation had reached its culmination point, transitioning from assessment to verification. Whatever specialized protocol Naftali had recommended would likely determine not just his mission's outcome, but his survival prospects as well. I welcome any opportunity to confirm my loyalty to Águila Negra, Miguel responded with appropriate confidence, neither displaying eagerness that might suggest manipulation nor reluctance that could indicate fear. 3 years of service speaks for itself, but I understand that extraordinary security concerns require extraordinary measures. Naftali nodded slightly, professional acknowledgement rather than agreement. Your psychological profile demonstrates exceptional compartmentalization capabilities. Mr. Reyes, standard interrogation methodologies would prove inconclusive against such disciplined emotional control. The observation carried both professional respect and lethal implication. Miguel recognized that his exceptional training, the very capability that had made him the agency's premier deep cover operative, now presented the greatest threat to his cover identity. Naftali had correctly identified that conventional counterintelligence approaches would fail against his specialized psychological preparation. Instead, the Israeli continued with clinical detachment. I've recommended a more definitive approach, one that bypasses psychological resistance entirely. Salgado moved to the conference room door with predatory anticipation, opening it to admit 2 men dressed in clinical attire wheeling a metal cart laden with specialized equipment. Miguel's tactical assessment immediately identified the apparatus as advanced pharmaceutical interrogation technology, not the crude chemical cocktails favored by cartel enforcers, but sophisticated neurochemical intervention systems developed for intelligence agencies and subsequently leaked to private security contractors. MD7, Naftali explained with clinical precision, a significant advancement over previous generation truth serums. It doesn't merely lower inhibitions, but creates a dissociative state where compartmentalization becomes neurologically impossible. The subject maintains consciousness and communicative capability, while physiological responses to deception are magnified beyond conscious control. Miguel processed this development with cold, tactical precision. MD7 represented cutting-edge interrogation pharmacology, classified at the highest levels within intelligence communities worldwide. The compound had demonstrated alarming effectiveness against agency psychological countermeasures during controlled testing, penetrating even the most sophisticated compartmentalization training. Fascinating technology, Miguel observed, with professional interest rather than personal concern. Though I've heard such compounds produce significant reliability issues when the subject has experienced psychological trauma or dissociative conditioning. The response represented perfect tactical repositioning, engaging with the technology as a security professional while subtly introducing doubt about its effectiveness against someone with his cover identity's military background. It projected neither fear nor resistance, but professional skepticism about methodology. An astute observation, Naftali acknowledged with clinical detachment. First-generation compounds indeed suffered reliability issues with subjects who had experienced extreme psychological conditioning. MD7 utilizes a different neurological pathway, bypassing trauma-related resistance mechanisms entirely. The Israelis' explanation confirmed Miguel's worst-case assessment. They had access to pharmaceutical interrogation technology specifically designed to overcome agency counter-interrogation training. The emerging scenario threatened not just his cover identity, but potentially all CIA deep cover operations if the methodology proved as effective as Naftali suggested. The procedure requires approximately 20 minutes to achieve optimal effectiveness, Naftali continued, gesturing to the technicians who began preparing the injection system with practiced efficiency, during which time we'll continue our professional discussion to establish final behavioral baselines. Miguel calculated his options with ruthless tactical precision, assessing both immediate escape possibilities and longer-term operational preservation strategies. The conference room security configuration eliminated direct extraction options. 2 armed guards at the door, electronic surveillance throughout the space, and Salgado's ever-present lethal readiness. I maintain my position that such extraordinary measures seem disproportionate to legitimate security concerns, Miguel stated with calculated confidence, neither displaying fear nor projecting excessive resistance. But I understand organizational preservation requires absolute certainty. How can I assist in establishing these baseline parameters? The response represented tactical necessity, acknowledging the inevitable while projecting the confident cooperation his cover identity would offer if genuinely innocent. It brought critical moments to assess counter-options while maintaining the precise psychological presentation that had preserved his cover through 3 years of deep infiltration. Your cooperation is commendable, Dominguez observed, with predatory satisfaction, though of course irrelevant to the procedure's effectiveness. MD7 renders willingness entirely ceremonial. Miguel met the cartel leader's gaze with measured confidence. My willingness isn't ceremonial, Don Alejandro. It's demonstrative of my continued loyalty despite these extraordinary circumstances. Naftali studied this exchange with clinical assessment rather than emotional engagement. Tell me, Mr. Reyes, have you ever undergone chemical interrogation during your military career? Many Special Forces units incorporate resistance training into their specialized preparation programs. The question represented another precisely calibrated counterintelligence probe. testing for specific knowledge while simultaneously establishing whether Miguel's psychological resistance capabilities reflected standard military training or something more specialized. It was the kind of layered interrogation technique that characterized elite counterintelligence methodology. Basic resistance training was standard protocol, Miguel acknowledged, offering information his cover identity would reasonably possess while carefully avoiding specifics that might trigger recognition patterns for agency training. Primarily focused on maintaining operational security under conventional truth serum protocols, nothing approaching this level of sophistication. The response provided appropriate background, consistent with his cover identity's military history, while establishing psychological distance from advanced interrogation resistance techniques that might suggest intelligence training. It was precisely calibrated to acknowledge what couldn't be denied while protecting what must remain concealed. Conventional protocols, Naftali repeated with clinical interest, such as sodium pentothal and its derivatives. Interesting that you'd specify that particular limitation. Miguel recognized the counterintelligence trap with professional clarity. His specification about conventional protocols potentially revealing knowledge of more advanced systems. The Israeli was probing for intelligence indicators hidden within casual conversation, the hallmark of elite counterintelligence methodology. Standard military terminology, Miguel responded with calculated precision. The instructors always emphasized the difference between what we might encounter in military detention versus more advanced intelligence service capabilities, primarily to ensure realistic expectations about resistance limitations. The explanation represented perfect tactical repositioning, acknowledging limited specialized knowledge while providing a legitimate explanation that reinforced his cover identity rather than undermining it. It reflected the careful balance between demonstrating appropriate expertise without revealing agency-specific training indicators. As the technicians completed their preparation of the MD7 delivery system, Salgado approached with predatory anticipation. Perhaps we should ensure our guest is appropriately secured before proceeding. Chemical compliance can sometimes produce unpredictable physical responses. Miguel recognized the critical decision point this development represented. Physical restraint would eliminate nearly all remaining tactical options, rendering him completely vulnerable to whatever pharmaceutical intervention Naftali had prepared. Yet resistance would immediately confirm their suspicions, triggering lethal response protocols before the interrogation even began. Unnecessary in this case, Naftali stated with clinical authority, surprising both Salgado and Miguel with his intervention. MD7 produces minimal involuntary muscular activity when properly administered. Physical restraint creates stress responses that can interfere with optimal neurochemical pathways. The unexpected statement carried complex implications that Miguel processed with tactical precision. Either Naftali genuinely believed restraints unnecessary from a procedural perspective, or he was deliberately maintaining tactical flexibility, perhaps to observe Miguel's behavior when presented with potential escape opportunities. I appreciate the professional courtesy, Miguel acknowledged with measured respect, intentionally signaling recognition of Naftali's procedural intervention without displaying excessive gratitude that might suggest tactical calculation. Though I understand if Senor Salgado's security concerns require additional precautions. The response maintained perfect cover integrity. acknowledging the procedural discussion while demonstrating appropriate deference to operational security concerns. It projected neither relief at avoiding restraint nor eagerness to remain unrestrained, but the balanced professional demeanor his cover identity demanded. Mr. Naftali's methodological expertise takes precedence in this phase. Dominguez ruled with calculated finality. Security measures remain adequate for any reasonable contingency. The statement carried unmistakable subtext. While Miguel would remain unrestrained during the procedure, any attempt to exploit this tactical opportunity would meet overwhelming lethal response. The cartel leader's confidence reflected both. The room's comprehensive security measures and absolute certainty in Naftali's counterintelligence methodology. The procedure works most effectively when the subject is engaged in active cognitive processing, Naftali explained, gesturing for the technician to approach with the prepared injection system. We'll continue our professional discussion throughout the initial uptake phase to establish optimal neurochemical distribution. Miguel calculated his remaining options with cold, tactical precision. The watch containing his emergency extraction beacon and last resort suicide capsule remained on his wrist, undetected by security screening due to its specialized construction. But activating either option required specific manipulation sequences that would be immediately visible to the trained observers surrounding him. Of course, Miguel acknowledged with professional composure. I assume you'll be establishing cognitive baselines before proceeding to operational security questions. The statement represented subtle intelligence gathering rather than information provision, attempting to identify the specific interrogation methodology Naftali intended to implement while displaying appropriate procedural knowledge his cover identity might reasonably possess. It projected neither resistance nor fear, but professional engagement with the process. Your familiarity with interrogation protocols is impressive, Naftali observed, with clinical assessment rather than accusation. Most subjects display significantly more anxiety at this procedural juncture. Miguel recognized the counterintelligence probe within the seemingly casual observation. His professional composure itself represented a potential indicator, the absence of expected fear potentially revealing specialized training in interrogation resistance. It was the kind of psychological inverse identification that characterized elite counterintelligence methodology. Anxiety compromises effective security assessment, Miguel responded with calculated precision. If this procedure confirms my loyalty to Águila Negra, my professional composure serves organizational interests. If it somehow reveals compromise, emotional displays wouldn't change the outcome. The explanation represented perfect tactical positioning, attributing his unusual composure to professional security consciousness rather than specialized resistance training. It acknowledged the behavioral anomaly Naftali had identified while providing a legitimate explanation consistent with his cover identity's security expertise. Something flickered in Naftali's expression. Not suspicion, but professional reassessment. The Israeli studied Miguel with renewed analytical focus, clearly recalibrating his counterintelligence approach based on unexpected behavioral patterns. A pragmatic perspective, Naftali acknowledged with clinical detachment. Roll up your sleeve, please, Miguel complied with deliberate calm, neither displaying reluctance nor excessive cooperation as he prepared for the injection. The technician approached with professional efficiency, swabbing the injection site with antiseptic before positioning the specialized delivery system against Miguel's exposed vein. You'll experience a mild burning sensation followed by slight disorientation, Naftali explained, his clinical tone betraying neither anticipation nor concern. Fighting these sensations typically intensifies their effects while providing no meaningful resistance to the compound's neurological mechanisms. Miguel processed this information with tactical precision, rapidly assessing pharmaceutical countermeasures against his remaining operational options. Agency training had included specialized techniques for managing chemical interrogation, controlled breathing patterns, mental focusing exercises, and neurological compartmentalization strategies, designed to maintain minimal operational security even under advanced pharmaceutical intervention. "I understand," Miguel acknowledged as the technician initiated the injection sequence. The specialized delivery system hissed softly as it administered the compound with precision dosing calibrated to Miguel's body weight and estimated metabolism. The initial sensation matched Naftali's description precisely, a burning progression through his vein, followed by waves of disorientation that radiated outward with alarming speed. Miguel implemented defensive protocols immediately, controlling his breathing while mentally reciting nonsense mathematical sequences designed to occupy conscious thought processes while protecting compartmentalized operational information. This initial phase typically induces mild dissociative effects, Naftali continued, his voice seeming to arrive from increasing distance despite his unchanged position across the table. Sensory distortion, time dilation, and cognitive fragmentation are normal responses that indicate proper neurological uptake. Miguel maintained absolute stillness as the compound's effects intensified, the room's dimensions appearing to shift, while colors separated into component wavelengths. The dissociative effects surpassed anything described in agency training manuals, suggesting MD7 indeed represented significant advancement over previous generation interrogation pharmaceuticals. "Can you describe what you're experiencing, Mr. Reyes?" Naftali inquired, his voice now carrying strange harmonics that stretched and compressed between words. Articulating the sensations often facilitates optimal neurochemical distribution. Miguel recognized the technique, encouraging verbal engagement during initial pharmaceutical uptake, both established baseline cognitive function and prevented implementation of certain counter-interrogation focusing techniques. It represented sophisticated understanding of chemical interrogation resistance methodology. "Visual distortion," Miguel responded with careful precision, intentionally slurring specific consonants to project appropriate pharmaceutical effect while maintaining more cognitive control than he revealed. "Time feels elastic, thoughts becoming difficult to sequence properly. The performance was precisely calibrated, acknowledging effects he couldn't conceal while exaggerating specific symptoms to create the impression of greater pharmaceutical vulnerability than he actually experienced. It represented the delicate, tactical balance between appearing affected enough to seem unresistant while preserving critical cognitive functions necessary for operational security. "Excellent progression," Naftali observed, studying Miguel's pupillary response and skin conductivity with clinical assessment. "MD7 bypasses the prefrontal cortex entirely, rendering executive function incapable of filtering limbic system responses. Conscious deception requires coordination between these neural systems that becomes neurologically impossible under proper pharmaceutical distribution. Miguel recognized the counterintelligence specialist was not merely explaining the procedure, but establishing psychological framework, creating expectations of inevitable disclosure that might prompt preemptive confession. It was sophisticated. Psychological manipulation layered atop pharmaceutical intervention, the hallmark of elite intelligence methodology. I'm going to ask a series of baseline questions to calibrate neurological response patterns, Naftali continued, his voice carrying strange resonance as the compound's effects intensified. Simple biographical information to establish normal response parameters before proceeding to operational security assessment. The approach confirmed Miguel's tactical assessment. Naftali was implementing textbook chemical interrogation protocol, establishing baseline truthful responses before transitioning to operationally significant questions. It represented professional thoroughness rather than uncertainty, confirming the Israelis' elite counterintelligence training. Your full name is Miguel Alejandro Reyes Ortega, Naftali began, the statement rather than question designed to establish cognitive recognition. The patterns. You were born September 12, 1982, in Veracruz, Mexico. Miguel allowed the information to flow through his consciousness without resistance, knowing these biographical details matched his cover identity's documentation perfectly. The CIA had constructed his legend with meticulous attention to detail, embedding verifiable history throughout Mexican government databases and creating physical documentation dating back decades. Yes, Miguel confirmed, allowing his voice to carry the distinctive flatness characteristic of chemical dissociation, while maintaining precise control over which information penetrated his increasingly fragmented consciousness. The agency's specialized training in pharmaceutical resistance emphasized controlled engagement rather than futile resistance, acknowledging verifiable details while protecting operational security through specialized compartmentalization techniques. You served in Grupo Aeromóvil de Fuerzas Especiales from 2004 to 2017, Naftali continued, establishing timeline baselines with methodical precision, achieving the rank of captain before your dishonorable discharge following the Michoacán operation. Miguel again confirmed without resistance, knowing these details represented verifiable military history meticulously constructed by CIA technical operations. His cover identity's military service records existed in secured Mexican defense databases, complete with performance evaluations, deployment histories, and the carefully crafted disciplinary proceedings that provided cover for his transition to cartel service. Your final military operation resulted in civilian casualties after intelligence failure, Naftali pressed, moving beyond simple biographical confirmation to emotionally weighted history. 7 non-combatants killed during a raid targeting Jalisco New Generation Cartel lieutenants. The official investigation found you personally responsible for rules of engagement violations. The scenario represented carefully constructed cover mythology, a tragic operational failure that provided both psychological motivation and practical explanation for Miguel's transition from military service to cartel employment. The CIA had created comprehensive documentation of the incident, including investigative reports, media coverage, and military tribunal proceedings. Faulty intelligence, Miguel responded, allowing genuine emotion to color his pharmaceutical flattened voice. Target location contained civilian hostages undisclosed in operational briefing. Command refused extraction when situation reported. Impossible tactical parameters. The response represented perfect tactical positioning, displaying appropriate emotional response to traumatic history while maintaining precise alignment with his cover identity's documented experience. It projected authentic psychological trauma consistent with his transition narrative while revealing nothing of his true agency affiliation. Naftali studied Miguel's physiological responses with clinical assessment, noting pupillary dilation, skin conductivity, and micro-expression patterns with professional precision. Your team leader, Colonel Marcos Hernandez, testified that you exceeded tactical authorization by proceeding with the assault despite intelligence uncertainty. The statement probed deeper into cover mythology, testing emotional response to specific details that would trigger authentic reaction in someone who had genuinely experienced the events described. It represented sophisticated interrogation methodology, using pharmaceutical enhancement to identify emotional inconsistencies that might reveal fictional backstory. Hernandez wasn't on site. Miguel countered with controlled intensity, allowing genuine indignation to infuse his response. Political protection from Central Command, operational parameters became impossible, but failure wasn't acceptable. Someone needed to take responsibility. The emotional response was precisely calibrated, displaying authentic resentment and professional frustration consistent with his cover identity's experience while maintaining coherent narrative alignment. Across all biographical details, it projected exactly the psychological profile his legend required. A capable military operator, betrayed by command structure and subsequently disgraced to protect political interests. Something shifted in Naftali's clinical assessment, not suspicion but tactical recalibration. The Israeli studied Miguel with renewed analytical focus, clearly processing physiological responses against anticipated patterns with professional precision. You joined Águila Negra 3 months after your discharge. Naftali continued, watching Miguel's physiological responses with clinical precision. Your operational recommendations consistently improved efficiency while creating subtle vulnerabilities exploited by federal authorities. Are you working for American intelligence? Miguel's tactical training fought against the MD7's neural invasion. The room swirled as the compound reached peak concentration in his bloodstream. He recognized this as the pivotal moment. His cover either survived or collapsed. I serve whoever values my skills, Miguel responded with pharmaceutical flatness. Military abandoned me. Águila Negra recognized my worth. Something unexpected flickered across Naftali's face. Doubt. At that precise moment, a deafening explosion rocked the compound perimeter. Emergency alarms blared throughout the hacienda. Security breach at the north gate, a voice shouted through Salgado's radio. Multiple attackers, military precision. Naftali and Dominguez exchanged alarmed glances as Salgado drew his weapon. Federal raid? The lieutenant demanded. Impossible, Naftali responded. No active operations in this sector. The conference room door burst open as a security operator rushed in. Don Alejandro, we need to move you immediately. Unknown forces have breached the inner perimeter. In the momentary chaos, Miguel made his decision. With precisely calculated movements that appeared as pharmaceutical disorientation, he activated the emergency beacon in his watch while simultaneously accessing the concealed ceramic blade against his lower back. Dominguez turned to Miguel with sudden, deadly clarity. "This timing is not coincidence. You brought them here." Before anyone could respond, the room's lights cut out, plunging everything into darkness, followed by emergency backup illumination. The momentary disorientation was all Miguel needed. 3 years of deep cover work culminated in 15 seconds of lethal precision. When the lights stabilized, Salgado lay incapacitated, the 2 guards neutralized, and Miguel held Naftali at blade point as leverage against Dominguez's drawn weapon. "CIA?" Dominguez asked with cold calculation, his gun unwavering. "Special Activities Division," Miguel confirmed as distant gunfire intensified. "Your European expansion plans won't be..." Proceeding, Don Alejandro. "You understand you won't leave this compound alive," Dominguez stated with lethal certainty. Miguel smiled with genuine confidence for the first time. The Águila Negra cartel ceased to exist 20 minutes ago. Simultaneous raids on 37 locations across 3 countries. Your organization has been dismantled while we've been having this fascinating conversation. The tactical breach team that entered moments later found Dominguez still processing this devastating revelation as Miguel secured both prisoners for extraction. 3 days later, debriefing at a secured agency facility, Miguel's mission was officially classified as the most successful deep cover operation in recent CIA history. Águila Negra's leadership had been completely neutralized. Their European expansion prevented and intelligence gathered that would disrupt cartel operations throughout the hemisphere for years to come. All because a cartel leader had mocked a seemingly broken veteran, never suspecting he was facing one of the most effective deep cover operatives in CIA history. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true accounts of undercover operations and espionage. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next upload, and let us know in the comments which part of Miguel's dangerous mission impressed you most.